So my presentation really talks about me and my journey as a result of being a rather impatient human being. My background is actually designing very expensive, high-performance, sustainable buildings for NASA and very high-level clients. And while working on it, I realized that what I was doing was not benefiting a wider audience. And what would I need to do in order to benefit the communities that I really am concerned about? And so this quote from Marsha Fudge really talks about the journey that's, as a Black designer, you're often faced with trying to fit yourself in. And as a result of starting my own practice and opening the office again in 2014, I realized that part of being a Black designer meant I also had to deal with policy and power because they affect the work that I do. And the presentation will start to talk about the real work of architects and architecture, which is what we build really truly reflects our social values. And if we can start to ground truth some of these policies, we'll be able to get to the point of the future that we really, really want to see. So the project I'm going to talk about really has to do with the impact of housing or lack of housing thereof, and how that impacts the African-American community, which we see every day from the large amount of humanity we see living on our streets. But also, as an architect who used to be an economist, I tend to look a lot at the very grounding data. 58% of our households spend more than 30% on rent. The fact that we have the average age of the homeless population being 50 and above tells us the narrative is wrong. People on our streets are not young and strong. People on the streets are getting older and older. And we are not planning for a full life cycle for a human being. We're not designing for it. And that is very disturbing to me, that we have a culture that really focuses on just the young and forgets that you go through an entire life cycle, and your body and needs really change over time as a result of those changes that where you are in your life. The fact that we have a society that I think mentioned earlier, convenient amnesia. It's as if we always look towards the young. But I was fortunate enough to meet a homeowner, fifth generation African-American, who made me and reminded me that there's another narrative that's out there, that Black families have always been on the margin, but they've always created their own pathway because they were forced to. And part of that, as a Black architect, I also work in the margins. I really look at the things that are informal, ignored. And one of the narratives that's out there is that, you know, the slum urbanism that we see, but I actually see something else, that we have a lot of space in our backyards, and this provides an opportunity to provide housing. Because I'm also very strategic in my impatience, Annette's request to build an in-law unit started a 3-year journey on a national initiative to get ADUs, accessory dwelling units, built at a national scale in order to conserve African-American communities and also cultural conservation using an ecological framework. And so from this detailed list of my methodology about how I look at policy, how I look at the actual geometry of land, has helped me to write national policy supporting in-law units and access to in-law units across the nation. But one aspect that you all may not realize, we talk about redlining and how white families have were able to accumulate wealth. What we don't talk about is how the nonprofit industrial complex also supports that wealth cycle. And one way we can break that is actually shifting what we spend on affordable housing units, which is about $600,000 per apartment to construct, where we could spend $150,000 instead on an in-law unit that a homeowner would own. One pathway is about investing in the home and the family. The other pathway is investing in a factory. And so you can tell that in my studio, we work a lot with numbers. We understand that we have 65,000 single family homes in Oakland. And if we only took 5% of that, we could build 3,265 in-law units. It's also remarkable that the cost of those units is $490 million. Well, actually in 2016, California authorized Alameda County to spend $580 million on affordable housing. So we could have taken care of 3,000 people already. But I also recognize that what I'm proposing really starts to take a hold of working as a community, that we shouldn't be thinking of factories building our homes, but rather, can we harness our local communities to build together? One of the things that concerns me is that we are splintered as a society. And I am actually interested in reknitting through a cooperative measure of designing and building our in-law units together, because that's how I think we're going to heal the society and reduce the fence lines that currently exist in our minds, but also how we're socializing. So this is an example of one of the units that how I approach the in-law unit design, where I'm looking at not just the efficiency of the unit, because I tap into my sustainable design background, but I'm also looking at what are those monthly expenses. So on this 3-year journey, I was invited to work with a rural community. And one of the things that came away from working with them on in-law units is how as a society, it's the cultural and collective values that will lead us our way forward, that it will not be a top-down, it will be a ground-up process. Now, the other part of Marsha Fudge's statement was that she was sick and tired of seeing a Black person tied of the HUD department, but I have to disagree with her. I need a Black person to be in charge of HUD because that's who provides the federal loans to build housing. And part of that is because I think we need to understand the wealth and value that we inherently own as Black families, but we don't understand the true value of it. And so what I am seeing is that the value difference between a white family and a Black family is a Black family is only able to build 1/3 the size of what a white family can build in terms of an in-law unit. And that's purely because of racism in the financial market. And so this presentation is really not just about design, but understanding that there's an environment that affects what we build. And if you're unaware of the nuances that support the housing market, we will never address this issue around wealth discrepancy. And so we have to we talk about fractals, but we actually have to understand what is the DNA of each and every single particle that supports the construction of a house, and each and every single particle that supports a community. And part of that understanding, it is a very fragile knitting of very informal, but sometimes very formal structures that we have to start talking about. We have to start dismantling those very structures that prevent us from building the housing that we want. So this is a very short presentation about advocacy and design in terms of in-law units. Thank you. So I'm gonna go back to.
Thank you, June.
That was really fast.
That was amazing, so visual. And I understand the power of ADU development on personal family wealth. So thank you so much for highlighting that. One of the things, and I ask you audience, come up with questions for June. We have her for the next 4.5 minutes. Can you speak a little bit more to the nonprofit industrial institution as it relates to ADU development?
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things that we're seeing is everyone loves the idea of prefab, right? But we also have to look at who owns that prefab factory. There are no prefab factories owned by a minority. They're all owned by white men. Now, if we're gonna spend and authorize $516 million of affordable housing, right? And that typically goes to a nonprofit affordable housing developer. Please look at who runs these organizations. Please also look at who gets those contracts to build, who looks at those contracts to design. It is disgusting the fact that you are not seeing minority design firms design affordable homes. It is not minority firms that are getting those contracts. It is not minority firms that are building those homes. And so the cycle of funding, which also applies to private development, is exactly what's happening in the nonprofit sector. And then we're spending, you the taxpayer, because these are debts, $600,000 being spent on a single apartment to construct it, versus 150, which could have been a simple loan to a family to stabilize that family. But also look at the fact that affordable housing units are not condos, they're apartments, so you are paying rent. You are not developing wealth. So we have to track the dollars to really understand the nuance that exists in the affordable housing market that we are taking for granted as a good cause. But really, when you look at the dollars and how they're being spent, I really question it. And I'm seeing it on, we can look outside and see how many people are on the streets.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. A lot of questions coming in. So we'll keep this one moving. Who is funding ADUs in the Bay? And is it affordable for the smaller developers who are looking to do that work? How do you do it for smaller Black-run firms?
We actually need a lot more Black and brown folks to pipe up and be adamant that they want to build. What is happening is that we are too quiet, and I'm the only one in the space sometimes. you don't get a product around financing if the banks don't understand that there's a market. So you have to actually clamor that you want to build. They're not going to design something if they don't believe that there's a market for it. So you're going out there and letting your people who you've elected to let them know you want an in-law unit package. Your bank, if you're working with a credit union, self-help credit union, has a loan program. I know Community Bank of the Bay is currently working with us on to create a home loan program. Silicon Valley Housing Trust has created a great program, which we're all trying to replicate in various cities. So each city right now is trying to create an ADU permit process as well as loan process. But a large part of it has to do with the fact that homeowners need to clamor and really say, we want a home loan. We do not want to subsidize housing.
Excellent. Well, there's so many questions. We're going to we'll take all of these questions and we will ask June to respond to them for the follow-up email. But let's take one more. So how do we generate buy-in? This is from Ingrid Rivera, and the previous question was from Naima McQueen. How do we generate buy-in, in particular when we are thinking about the housing crisis and so many folks falling into homelessness, especially now in light of COVID? How do we get homeowners to allow folks experiencing homelessness to open their homes? And how do we ensure services are provided so that folks can eventually move into their own homes?
So the question assumes that homeowners are not interested or willing. In fact, homeowners are, and I'm actually working with a group of us, maybe 10 of us, we're predominantly African-American. We're funded through CZI, Chan Zuckerberg, where I think next summer we'll be able to launch the program that starts to address this issue around not just education, but how to onboard and encourage homeowners to take on in-law units. Because I recognize that what we're doing is asking homeowners to become developers. And as designers, we are able to create that baseline that will be like a guideline and educational process about how to build your own in-law unit, who to talk to, which bank to go to, et cetera. But I have yet to meet a homeowner who is not interested in building. In fact, I have not met a single African-American homeowner who is not interested in building an in-law unit. So there's a narrative out there that people are afraid. And actually, that's not the narrative I experience.
Excellent. Well, we'll take one last one because there's so many, and clearly people are a very juicy topic. Provost Chiniere asked, how could creative land use of land owned by higher ed institutions also be a part of sparking this kind of transformative development?
Oh, that's a fantastic question, because many institutions have dormitories as well as their own empty land. I would say that we need to create a master plan around that if we would want to do large numbers of small units, because at that point you're really going into development. But also if you have a network of homeowners who have typically rented to students, you may want to tap those homeowners to see if they're interested in building an in-law unit. Because right now we know, say the teachers union is interested in supporting in-law units. And we have a list of teachers who are looking to rent in-law units. And what we're trying to do is create a financial package just for the teaching association. So I think if an institution steps up and say, we want to build, we can do that. We can work with the institution to figure out what that process would be. You got to reach out to me so I help you out.